Bring the meeting of the Oconee County Planning Commission to order. Tonight is Thursday, September 5th, 2024. I'd like to start with invocation, if you would lead us in that.
Pray with me if you will. Heavenly Father, we ask that you please watch over this committee and the planning staff and guide us to wise and safety-conscious decisions in supporting the public. We also ask that you watch over the county law enforcement, first responders, and other county workers as they perform their duties, that they may return home safely to their families after every shift. And we ask that you please watch over the county and state leaders as they work to make the county and state a better place to live each day. In His name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we've got the minutes from August 19th. Can I get an approval of those minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of those minutes being approved, say aye.
Unanimous.
All right, we've got commissioner member comments.
There are none.
No commission member comments.
Yeah, not sure.
None?
Sorry.
Nobody? All right, staff comments.
Yep, two things for you. The first, the COBA recommendation was on the last county council meeting agenda, was postponed, so that will be coming up October 1st is the date everybody agreed to. Just if anybody's interested in following that. Second, I got another subdivision to share with you
Mr.
guys
Chairman,
tonight.
I'm sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt.
Yes.
Did we ask for public comments? Don't those, it says here that before the commission.
It does say that, doesn't it? Well, I've gotten a little bit out of order. I was just trying to ignore Tom there, so.
So there's
I make a motion to amend the
non-agenda.
agenda to just put public comments after staff comments.
I'll second that. All those in favor say aye. Mr. Gollin?
Is not, you just have David Root on the phone.
Oh, that's David Roots on the
Yes.
phone. Okay. Okay. Yes, perfect. And so go ahead,
Okay.
James.
So this is a second phase for Walhalla, on Windsor at Walhalla off of Nelly Road. I'll bring over the other map here in just a second. Obviously this is kind of still a conceptual, so they don't have lot size on there or anything like that yet, so they'll get that through the comments that we send back to them. But this is what they're proposing right now, and I'm gonna bring over the zoning map so I can show you kind of location of this. This was their last phase up through here. And it will be this parcel, this parcel, this parcel, and this little parcel right here. So,
Is it on the dirt road, Jay?
no, this is paved road, Nelly Road, and then they're gonna build a couple additional, they got about 5 acres total of new roads in there.
Is it Falcon's Lair, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So these 4 parcels right here match up with these existing parcels right here.
Gotcha.
So north is gonna be going to your left. I'll swap that back, so these coming down, that will continue that way. Happy to answer any questions about it. We have very little information on it right now, but this is just what we got at this point.
When a developer builds out in phases like that, is that easier for the planning department, harder for the planning department?
It's kind of 6 in 1.
Okay.
As far as their state permits go, it's the way they choose to do it, but my personal opinion would be easier to get your state permits all at once and one time in one application, because that's typically gonna be your biggest hurdle. But
Gotcha.
up to them.
That it for staff comments?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's get to the public comments. Mr. Markovich, I apologize for ignoring you there.
For the record, I am Tom Markovich. I wanted to speak about the issue of amending what we're calling major subdivisions. I'm not sure what a major subdivision is because it's not defined in 222.
10 or more.
Huh?
It's 10 or more.
Well, minor is 10 or less.
Yep.
There is nothing that says what major is. It only defines minor.
Okay.
So, anyway, but I think the biggest issue with this is that I think it's going to be very difficult to construct something and not begin to push up against the vested rights rules. And the vested rights laws are very, very specific. They've been in fact, one of the first cases that involved vested rights was right here in this county. And it applied to a project that was out on the lake. And anyway, it's very, state law is very specific about the process for approving subdivisions. And Oconee's own subdivision ordinance is very specific about, But the big thing is that there's specific language in the state law that says the developer and the planning director should be able to sit down, and if they need to work out something, they should just be able to come to an agreement. I don't think that would really truly require a change to the ordinance. I think a developer ought to be able to just sit down with the planning director, and if they need to work through something, if a timeline is being, coming up against a timeline. But we gotta be really careful because of the vested rights rules. So, anyway, that's all.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we are going to open the discussion now regarding lot setbacks, particular reference to flag lots and irregular shaped lots. This was something that in our last meeting we had asked Mr. Root to put down in something that could be looked at as an ordinance with some of the changes that we had asked to be made. Hope everyone had a chance to review those, and I'd like to open that up for discussion.
Do we want to lead with Mr. Root and let him?
Sure, Mr. Root, if you've got something to add to that.
I do, just very briefly, and just as a heads up, I do need to, and I don't think it'll take that long, but jump out of the meeting right around 6:30. And also to touch on, since y'all be talking about it after I'm off, that Tom Markovich is right. The Vested Rights Act is very specific, but it also calls for specific government action, not a stagnant application. So there's a lot of intricacies to it, but I wouldn't forego that discussion. As to the setback provisions, the one thing I wanted to call out, essentially Exhibit A is just an acceptance of the red line changes that we discussed in Exhibit B. We went over during the last meeting. But I wanted to call out, I did it by highlights, additional language that I added when I was making this Exhibit A. So all of those, the new language from what we discussed is highlighted. And you can see from what I highlighted, what I added, nothing I would consider really material or very substantial or substantive apart from the addition to the irregular lot provision. But just to go down them real quickly, lot width, you'll see, unless indicated otherwise by context. Are y'all tracking with me on Exhibit A?
Yes.
All right. So I just added that because lot width is used in other contexts. Like you cannot build until you meet the lot width. Well, obviously, if we're just defining the lot width at the front, which is the general way to define it, that's not going to work. That's going to cause some inconsistency, at least in the application. So I added that language. I think that was pretty clear. The next page for me, which is the last part of the Chapter 32 revisions, we had added or road right-of-way as applicable to all the other definitions of this setback line. It wasn't in here, so I added that. Then, what I think is a substantive one I really wanted to talk about was back into 38. So we're talking about the dimensional requirement. And this is E. with me?
Yes, yes, sir.
All right.
Under E?
So I just felt that there might be, and James would know better, and we haven't discussed this in depth at all prior to this, prior to me inserting this, but I felt that there still might be some confusion between flag lots and irregular lots and application of the two provisions the way we just had it written. So I wanted to add this highlighted language. No particular pride in authorship. You can butcher it up, cut it up, any ideas. I just think it's probably better so we make that distinction all the more clear between flag lots and the irregular shaped lots that we're attempting to address in E.
Okay.
I mean,
Was there anything else that
and I
you
think the
wanted?
last one was just another one on lot width where I added that same language unless indicated otherwise by context. So that would be it. All I had to comment on and the only additions.
Okay, I did have a question for you. Actually, you and James, as I was reading through Exhibit A, under the Chapter 32, 212, under definitions, under building line, and I wanted to double check with both of you. It says building line means a line beyond which no part of the structure of any building shall project unless specifically permitted in this code of ordinances, with the exception of subsurface projection of footings. As being looking like the only thing. But I know when James and I have talked, driveways can be outside of the building line, as can sidewalks be outside the building line. But as I'm reading this, building line is specific that there's only one exception, and that's subsurface projection of footings. Does it need to be added to say footings, driveways, and sidewalks?
I didn't believe it as part of the structure, and I can, James, certainly jump in, but just the only additions that we made here, building line has been in there defined just as is. I just made it clear because it's referred to as building setback line, so you can see that on Exhibit B.
Yeah, and I just
So
assumed
that was
stay.
the only definition, and I think an application has probably not been difficult. I've not heard issues with it, but James, please tell me if I'm wrong.
We don't consider any of those on-grade facilities as part of the structure, so we
Okay.
don't, like, the driveway obviously needs to connect to the road system, right? So that can go all the way up, and we don't consider those vertical.
So it's not something that down the road somebody could interpret different?
I would have a hard time trying to make that justification in my mind. That
Okay.
it was,
All right, that was one question I had. I had another question under the diagram. I think it probably brings, the next diagram as you scroll up there, James, that diagram there. That diagram confused me because as I read down at the bottom, it has yard line, setback line, and then a front yard setback, but those are different measures. And it seemed like that the picture was in conflict where it says front yard setback. Now, along that, it says front yard setback, but there's actually not a definition for front yard setback. There's a definition for yard, and there's a definition for setback. But we do have something called building setback. It's almost as if the yard is really everything that remains after all the other calculations have been applied. Do we need that whole definition of yard? I know it's been there before, but it's almost as if yard and setback, building setback, are either one and the same or are in conflict.
Yeah, I think they're pretty close to one and the same and not in conflict. I've not heard any difficulties in application, but this diagram, I don't know if we did talk about it. I remember in my copy, I wanted to talk about it. I think it highlights the difficulties in the various definitions. But I think obviously what it's trying to say here is this is how far the building is set back, and then the buildable area is the required setback. I would love, as opposed to changing the yard and calling all of that out all throughout the code, because yard is used a lot, and I certainly don't want to call out the setback provisions. I'd rather just ditch this diagram.
Diagram? Okay. Because the rear yard setback and front yard setback are confusing because it seems different than the buildable area setback.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you do have to do some language twisting to get to like the normal application of it. And James, you tell me too, in application of this, is this diagram problematic? We can certainly make a better one, I think.
This is the one that you and I actually talked about a little bit, that I'm not a huge fan of, but because we had so many different definitions that were in there, we left it in. I'm fine with it coming out.
Coming out?
Yeah.
It seems like it might at least go back to the language then, and our language seems pretty clear.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
remove that diagram. If, well, I guess we should do that individually, so I'd make a motion to remove this diagram that we've been describing. Do I hear a second on that?
I second it.
And then all those in favor of removing that diagram, say aye.
Well, I got a question.
Oh, sorry, discussion?
3812-2, front yard setback. Is that not a definition?
38,
One page over from that diagram.
all right. 3812-2, under what, front yard setback?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, yeah, that is a definition, you're right.
that's telling you what the diagram is. I mean, I don't know what the value of that is, but, I mean, it is in there.
Yeah, it is in there. I think it's in conflict with the picture.
I think the picture's just just confusing, ultimately. But I agree, the definitions can line up to work with the diagram, but you have to do some gymnastics to get there. Yeah. If the commission's inclined, I think
where
remove.
it talks about on the diagram, it says rear yard setback and buildable area. Well, buildable area is based off the setback. And so why is the yard setback different than the buildable setback?
Yeah,
When you
but,
read them, they read the same.
right, but when you take out this diagram, now the front yard setback becomes confusing, right? It's the definition. Why do we even have, I'm like you, why do we have yard setbacks? And why is that different than a regular setback, a building setback?
So you go back to my other point of the yard definition, is it necessary? Because in fact, if you meet the other criteria of building setbacks and width of the lot and right-of-ways and all that, then the yard is simply the remaining space. The concern might be is that under yard, there's things that you can't do in a yard. Unoccupied and unobstructed from the ground upwards, is that trees included?
Is this old, this is old code already?
Yes.
This is,
And just to
why are we-
draw your recollection back to
trying
what we were talking about before, yard is stayed in there. I tried to make the definitions harmonized. The yard is used throughout, just like you're saying, almost exchangeably with setback. But as far as, you go into each district, in 38, yard is referenced. If you want to pull out yard and replace it with setback throughout the code, we can make that happen. That will be obviously a bigger enterprise than we can do right now.
I don't think that's the intent of what we're
Yard
trying
is
to do.
used pretty ubiquitously.
So since yard is used, it may be that we come back at a later date and address yard throughout, potentially? Throughout the ordinances as a
Yeah, we-
definition, but not to address it tonight? Is that? kind of
We
what-
certainly could, yes.
is that
I'm
what
all
you're
for
hearing,
making it
Mr.
simpler,
Nance?
but
Well,
the experience has been if we take big chunks of 32 and 38, something falls off or falls sideways.
What you're
elsewhere.
saying
So
is yard is
I tried
used
to
in
make it
other
as
areas.
explicit as I could, but it was still a lot of changes.
Okay. I'm just a fan of taking out that diagram for the moment, and if we address yard, we go back through all and find out where yard is defined, and then see if by taking it out of one without taking it out of others is a problem, and it very well might be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if we can take it out of all of them in the future, then we address taking them all out in the future.
I don't think we ought to take it out right now because we're not dealing with the yard issue.
So just, do you not think we should take the diagram out?
I don't think so.
My concern about the diagram is that where it says rear yard setback, that's a greater distance than the buildable area. And yet the yard says you can't build anything in the yard setback. So which is it, the buildable area or the yard setback as being accurate? Can you go back to that diagram? On the diagram, if you look at the top, it says rear yard setback off to the left. That distance should be the same distance as that buildable area line. And it's not, it's twice the distance. Because the buildable area is the building setback.
So is there something wrong with the diagram?
Yes.
So why don't we fix the diagram instead of making it go away?
Okay.
I think you could primarily fix it just by getting rid of these, getting rid of the rear yard setback arrow dimensions on the left.
The two arrows on the left.
Yards still have yard lines, setback lines in parentheses. That still works.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
because
you'd probably want to modify it to show required yard setback in the rear and the sides a little bit better. I just don't know, James is going to be the expert in this, if it's needed at all.
well, there's a lot of people that are visual and they don't like reading through the words when they can look at a picture. So I like it
Sure.
being in there. Yeah.
Would you, James, would it be workable or make sense if we removed those two far left?
That or just do a fresh, nice, clean diagram. Probably be easier than trying to edit this. I'm not sure where this came from or how old it is, but I think we can do
Okay.
something.
If we go back to the definition, chapter 32, 212 yards. This is what has created that diagram. The word under the definition of yards, or yard. It's basically stating it's a space that lies between the principal building or buildings and the nearest lot line or road right of way. So it's not even talking about, to me, when I read that, it's not talking about your buildable area. It's just talking about your established building and the right of way. So that's what created that diagram.
Yeah, I think it might be a function of using the word setback. That makes it worse, but yeah, I mean,
I
the
think
yard
they're
is
defined.
the open area, but then we use required yard. And then yard is used, like I say, in every district as the setback.
So let me ask you this, I think it's the second sentence in what you said there that's the potential conflict, in that yard is really just a definition of, hey, once the building is up, it's the distance between the building and the road, for simplicity's sake, right of way, whatever. But then we come down to the second sentence that says that, and other than that, it's just a definition of things that have taken place. But then it says the minimum required yard shall be unoccupied and unobstructed from the ground upward. Is that saying that any future stuff can't be within the yard?
And that is saying that, because the minimum required yard is from the actual setback line.
I actually don't think there's any, after reading, I don't think there's anything wrong with the diagram. I think it's consistent with the wording because there's an overlap between the front yard setback and the yard lines or setback lines. There is an overlap, the way it's defined.
There is, and that's the gymnastics I'm talking about. You can make the diagram work, but can we do better, I guess, is
Tell me,
Correct.
James, what you just said about the second sentence.
Yeah, so the minimum required yard is actually referring to the setback line. So that is what the very bare minimum required is. You can build all the way up to that setback line
Gotcha.
and have the minimum required yard space
That's
still.
exactly right. There's an overlap.
Yes.
There's an overlap.
Okay. So technically, it is all correct then?
The best kind of correct, yes.
Okay. So, so my motion then that's on the floor is that we had removed that, and we've had a discussion about it. And it sounds like we feel like that the diagram is accurate as it stands. And is it your opinion then to leave it?
I recommend you withdraw your motion to strike the diagram.
Okay, I will withdraw my motion, since it's been there for that long. So that answers that for me. Is there another part here? I think, Ms. Root, those are the only questions I had for you. Oh, I take that back. There's one other thing. Under that diagram, if we can go back to that, in item E, just before your additions there, the wording, I read it and read it and read it, and it seemed like there were more words there than needed to be there. And please help me understand. Where it says the second sentence, property line of road right of way is applicable. The setback shall be measured such that the distance. Does such that the distance need to be there? The setback shall be measured from the property line or the road right of way as applicable. And then it goes down to say shall nonetheless be included as a measure. Does that need to be there? In other words, could it simply read, the setback shall be measured from the property line or the road setback, or road right-of-way as applicable, period?
Let me read it and think about it again. James came up with this one and y'all adopted this version, so maybe everyone take a second thought on it. I think it's clarifying. I don't know that in the most draconian way it's necessary, but I would lean to the way it's necessary. I like the way that it's written.
Okay.
I'm assuming, and James, you still feel comfortable with that language? Yes.
I do, but I have no, pride and ownership of anything. I'm happy to have any changes that our attorney suggests.
No, I'm just bringing things up because as I was reading them, I kept reading it going, am I understanding exactly what that's saying, or is that extra words that don't need to be there? And so, again, just asking. The last question is continuing on, the buildable area shall not, however, include any area where the minimum lot width is met.
No.
Do we need to be consistent with the first sentence and say the district minimum lot width is met?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just asking it. We've said it in the first.
Certainly doesn't trouble me any. It's just y'all.
I don't know that it's necessary, and you're the attorney, I sure don't want to, again, it says it at the front, district, but as we are looking at different zones, and as we have so much more now going into control-free and things like that, to me, anywhere where we can define what's what is not a bad thing.
Would you like it the district minimum lot width, or as it said at the top, for the respective district after the required minimum lot width?
I think the simpler the better. And you've got it the simplest form, the minimum lot width is not met, but it would really the district minimum lot width.
Well, I think that's how the minimum lot is defined, and that's why it's anchored to the very first sentence, but I'm good with adding more words, and as long as it doesn't convolute. So do you want to just put district minimum lot at the beginning or before?
What is anybody else's thought on that particular?
Well, the district minimum lot width is included in the highlighted items below that.
District minimum lot width. So it's in the very first sentence, it's in the very last sentence. The question is, does it need to be consistently within all sentences?
I don't believe it creates a legal infirmity or an ambiguity, but it's super easy to add in.
If nobody else has an interest in adding it, I'm not worried about it. Those are all the things that I had questions on. Any other questions? Mr. Haney, were you wanting to talk
Yeah,
about?
I have actually a few questions. First, James, this is for you. What determines a flag lot versus a private drive?
The shape of the actual parcel as opposed to, the private drive is just servicing the parcel.
The shape of the actual parcel.
Yeah, so to be a flag lot, it has to have the flagpole portion and then another portion of the lot, that's where the buildable area would be.
So I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
your thought process here.
Okay.
So if a farmer sold off property along the road frontage and had an easement that went to property behind those properties, would that be considered a flag lot?
Depends on how much they left themselves to access it.
Okay. When you say how much they left themselves to access, what's your definition?
Of,
What would be the determined factor between one or?
so if they want to just have it as a driveway,
Mhm.
there is not a minimum requirement. It could be 12 feet, it could be 30 feet, it could be 45 feet, whatever. But if they're going to do future development out there and have more than 3 dwellings, right? So they need more than a driveway. They'd require the 50-foot minimum right-of-way
Okay,
to do a private drive or a private road.
all right. And that leads me into where I'm at. I still don't think we've nailed down the definition of a flag lot. First, under the definition, hold on, let me put on my glasses so I can see where I'm at. I would assume we want flag lots to only pertain to subdivisions.
Not necessarily. So
Not necessarily?
It doesn't have to be, well, every parcel cuts a subdivision, but I think we're talking about like multiple dwellings or multiple lots when you say that.
So right after, the definition of flag lot means a lot shaped like a flag on a pole, I'd like to make a motion to add in, or something similar to this, have Mr. Reed look it over and, put his legalese on it. But I would like to, make a motion to add, flag lots shall only pertain to subdivided lots similar in shape or size. And I'm open for input. Because I think what that does, it keeps that farmer from selling off, or any property that's being sold off, if there's 3 acres back behind those properties that have been sold off in half-acre or 1-acre properties, it keeps them from being tied into the flag lot, which limits their ability of what they can do with that property.
James, Mr. Haney and I were talking about this. He had asked me the question, and in working through this, the objective has been working through it under the lens of designing of a subdivision and designing lots in a subdivision. It could also apply if you're going down XYZ Farm Road and there's a house, and a driveway going to a lot just behind it, which we've seen is somewhat problematic with the number of driveways when it's really not designed as a subdivision, but it is a lot back there. But what happens if we take that and it goes actually to a land tract versus this subdivision kind of vision? And if I'm understanding what you're asking now is there a way to, Mr. Root, make this apply to this creation of a subdivision as opposed to simply a long access to 100 acres?
So I think where we've got in, and I think it's in the other section where we have the minimum and maximum width. So between 22 feet and 40 feet is less than is required to do a private drive or a private road. In that it's gonna limit you to, you're only gonna be accessed 3 dwellings off of a driveway. You're not gonna be able to make a subdivision unless you have 50 feet for that right of way that's required. by having 50 feet, you're automatically not a flag lot any longer. It is future access or access to whatever you're gonna be doing back on that larger tract.
So I guess the question would come, I know it's been brought up a few times, and it's not really for discussion tonight, where we've seen lots going to mass acreage, and we have this private roads and public roads scenario, that if that ever gets adjusted in the future in any way, then this becomes potentially problematic. Is that a correct assessment?
I think potentially is, yeah, potentially.
Well, I think right now, we've got and which I've always been curious of this, is how many county-maintained roads are actually only have prescriptive easements.
I couldn't tell you.
It's, I know of a good many up in Salem.
Yeah.
So it's, you already are below the 50-foot right-of-way. A lot of those are 12-foot, and the paved ones are a lot of times only 16, 18 foot. Cross Creek being one of them. So it's, and that services, many houses. So I just think that's something, well, this is the opportunity to build upon it. The question is, can we put that in there so that it does not tie the hands of the property owner that owns larger parcels of property behind other properties that have been sold off?
So let me ask you this. If thinking that big picture of stuff, we've had that conversation about public roads, private roads, whether that's addressed or not in the future, but we had talked about that there's 20 foot with 5 foot on either side is what the fire department needed. That's 30 foot. Instead of this saying 22 feet and 40 feet, should it say, if we're talking about a subdivision, truly a subdivision, beyond 30 feet now, it simply becomes an irregular lot. Instead of 22 to 40, should that be some number to 30?
Well, that was
And
my
that
next.
solves both issues, future and present.
That was the next thing I was leading into. So I ran some numbers on what I think a flag lot, the definition should be. And down at the very bottom, I think we should add in the flagpole portion of a flag lot must have 2 parallel property lines creating the length of the pole. These lines shall not vary greater than 5 degrees from parallel. The reason I've made that statement is because at 300 foot at a 5 degree angle on a, let me get my numbers here. You're at the maximum width, you end up having you have to add 26 feet to that 40 foot. So as it comes out, you're going to end up with 66 feet at the top. At the minimum width lot at the bottom, you're going to end up with 48 feet. At 200 feet, you're going to end up with 57 at the maximum, 39 at the minimum. At 100, you're going to end up at 49 and 31. And at 50 foot, you're going to end up at 44 foot and 26 feet. So as that lot, if it's not a true flag lot and it's going off into an obtuse angle, it ends up eating up a lot of buildable property or usable property if we do not define that definition down to where it truly is a flag pole. And the other thing is, at 30 feet, at a 30-foot maximum width, at 300 feet, which is in the ordinance now, at the very top of that triangle, you end up only eating up 56 feet. So it's, that's something we got to think about, because those angles grow.
So James, let me ask you this. Right now, when we talk about the district minimum as far as the house is concerned, we're really looking at residential zoning or some sort of zoning criteria outside of control-free.
Yep.
However, flag lots applies to control-free. Is that,
No.
flag lots don't apply at all
They
to
do not.
control-free in any
That is the very first
capacity?
part of that in the, let me scroll up here real quick in 38. So, sorry, right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in addition to the dimensional requirements listed below, the district dimensional requirements, further dimensional requirements may be set forth, A5. Condition, the control-free district shall be exempt from the provisions of this section except provisions listed under item 2 setbacks. So all of the flag lot portions don't apply to control-free.
So, talking about these lines varying and starting at 30 or 40 feet and expanding out to 65 feet, which you could potentially build in a 65-foot lot, you couldn't build in that anyway because anything that is currently zoned has an 80-foot as the minimum. Is that a
The
correct
majority of
assessment?
residential zoning districts are 80, yeah.
But there's no other, is there a district that has less than 80? Control-free has nothing.
So I thought, hang on, let me just look real quick. I thought that the,
Kind of what we're getting at is,
Commercial
does it
or-
matter? It's, because what we don't want to do is somebody that could build within the quote flag pole, and now we've prevented them from doing it. We don't want that to happen.
so highway commercial is 70 for residential use.
It's 70, so if the math, if you're doing the math right, 64 is being the largest, they still couldn't build within the pole.
66, yeah. And that's on a,
So right, and control-free doesn't apply at all. There's
Correct,
no,
it does not apply.
so if somebody had a lot that went from 30 feet to expanded to 64 feet, and they could build within that as long as they built within the setbacks that are required of control-free.
Yep.
Okay. I don't know that we need to address that then.
well, I think how we got here was because dealing with flag lots, we were stating that we did not have a true definition of what a flag lot was. And we were stating that irregular lots were flag lots. So this really ties down what a flag lot is. It says, okay, the two property lines that create the pole, the length of the pole, have to be parallel or can only vary by 5-degree angle. It really defines that. So then if you're looking at a lot in a residential area that falls outside that parameter, it has to be treated as a irregular shaped lot, not a flag lot.
Like on this diagram, what are you gonna do if a property line's in a ditch, it runs down the side of a holler? It ain't gonna be a straight line.
It's not gonna be a straight line, you're right, but I think if it falls within that point-to-point parameter, it's got to meet that minimum width requirement. But once it goes past that 5 degrees is where we're getting into the interpretation of, is this the flag lot or is this a irregular shaped lot? So potentially, the one that runs down that ditch line, if it's going outside of that parameter, then it's an irregular shaped lot. And that changes their buildable area. I just don't like leaving things that are open for interpretation. I like clearly defining them, and that's where I was trying to go with this. It's easier to define a flag lot than it would be an irregular shaped lot.
Hey, Mickey. All right, so I'm resurrecting my trigonometry.
Okay?
A 300-foot long flagpole.
Mhm.
You're saying that if one line, or if one of the sides of the pole is not parallel to the other by 5 degrees, then we got 26 feet
26
difference
feet
at the end
at the end.
from the other end, 26 feet difference.
0 to, yeah.
Well, that would change the minimum widths and maximum widths, right?
Well, that's
We
what
wouldn't
I'm
really
saying.
have a minimum or maximum, right?
Right, because then we're falling
Oh, I see where you're going, because then we'd fall outside of that.
Correct. You can't define a minimum or maximum width if the lines are not parallel to each other,
Right.
unless you come up with some trigonometry stuff, so.
And,
So you're saying it automatically falls less than 5 degrees over a 300-foot period because the maximum is already set at 40?
40.
That makes sense. So we're right to begin with the 22 and 40 then, because it can't go outside the 40, otherwise it does become an irregular to begin with. Is that,
Well, let's think it through.
No, if it's a minimum on one end, 22 feet, then if it's a 300-foot-long flagpole, then at the end, it'll be 48 feet.
Well, that's out of the,
which becomes out of the 40-foot maximum, therefore it no longer falls within
Yeah.
the definition of
So
flag
you
lot.
can't use 5 degrees.
Right, because we've already defined it into a tighter window.
My point being is that it's 40 foot wide enough to build in any kind of zoning district.
So why don't we just say approximately parallel and let the planning manager decide what approximate is, and leave the minimum and maximum widths.
As they are.
So you might have something that's 22 feet at one end and 40 at the other. But that's all, whatever angle that is, it doesn't matter. You define the minimum and maximum, so you've got a flagpole that's a little wonky, but 22 feet at one end, 40 at the other,
Well,
whatever.
and as it was mentioned, it
That's as
it
wonky
could
as it
do
could be,
this. So, going through. So potentially, I think that the fact that we have the minimum and the maximum here is the guardrails.
I'm just not a fan of getting people into trigonometry when they don't have to.
you're gonna create trying to make this so thread the needle, every lot's gonna be an irregular shaped lot. There'll be no more flag, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
it's
we've
just-
got guardrails here, and as long as the guardrails are met, it's a flag lot, and if it's outside of those guardrails, then it's now an irregular shaped lot,
Hey,
and we just
I'm
call it.
fine with that, because the 22 and the 40 ties it in tighter than I was trying to go.
Put it down to go. Yep. So,
It also keeps it less than the 52, which is whole other issue.
Mr. Root, I know that, is he still there, or is he gone?
I
at
think
this
he's
point?
gone.
I think he's going.
I'm still here.
Oh, sorry. We-
Decided to get in trouble with someone else.
I think that we have hammered this as much as we can. I don't think we had any changes based on our conversation. So so I'd like to make a motion that this thing be inked in a way that could go up to county council.
Really, and just before you carry that motion, it's really just gonna be removing the yellow. Of course, I'll give one, and James's office has kind of been a really tight read to it too, but it'll only be removing the yellow from both. I still will keep Exhibit A, which is the clean copy, which will be codified, and Exhibit B, which will show everybody what the changes are. So it'll look pretty much just like what you got.
Okay. So do I hear a second on this is the final draft to go to council?
Do you want to send that with a recommendation to council?
I would like to send it with a recommendation, and I would like one of us or myself to explain why there is a need for this change.
I second your motion.
Do you all want me to go up in front of council and
I think
give
that
the
would
reason?
I think that would be good for the chairman of the planning commission to speak to the
And
ordinance
then
that he
just one
wants
more
the council to
clarifier,
pass.
the recommendation would be to accept it, correct? I know I'm making presumptions. I
Yes,
think
no,
that's just to clarify.
would be to accept this, yes. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion on this? All those in favor then signify by saying aye.
Unanimous?
All right.
Good deal. I will put it in final form and send it up, and I'm glad that you recommended to council that they approve the changes you made, or else I would be out hitting my head against the flagpole.
Thank you, sir, for all your hard work. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I think the rest of this, unless you need to be here, is up to us.
Either way.
And I'll watch the rest of the meeting tomorrow, so if there's any follow-up, we'll tag on to it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank y'all. Take good care.
So we've got now two more things to discuss and potentially make recommendations on as we go forward and things like that. Number 9 here is a discussion and recommendation for council 432-222 preliminary plan. James, I'd like you to go into kind of detail on that as to what this is about.
Yeah, so in 32.222 right now, and I'll pull that over so you guys can actually see it. I don't like that. Okay. Under the supporting data, so right now, item number 2 is the applicant shall submit all the appropriate fees at the time of application. We're still on a clock to provide feedback for them. The request is just to kind of change that language a little bit in that, right now, most of our subdivisions are paying right before they get their final approval letter. So that's the only thing that we're actually holding back from them is the actual approval. And we'd like to maybe make some of those payments up front or before the initial feedback is given, but to start the clock after the payment is made so that we can kind of do that.
So in other words, you're not doing work for free.
And we have had several of those failed subdivisions that have never paid for any of the reviews that we've done and the staff time that's been invested in those reviews.
What is a typical appropriate fee at the time of that? So what are they typically looking at as far as appropriate fees? What does that?
It's based on the number of lots in the subdivision. So a minor subdivision might be $100, or now would be, $200 or $300. A major subdivision could be $1,500 to $3,000, depending on how big it is.
And what you're requesting here is at the time that they submit the application.
So they can submit the application, but our timing to provide our initial feedback would start once that payment is made.
Gotcha. Because right now, it's that you're on the clock once they send it over
Once
to
they submit
you.
the application.
So many days, you're
Yes.
supposed to respond.
Correct.
So you want to amend Alpha 2 to basically say the applicant shall submit all appropriate fees at time of application, and the review period shall not begin until such fees are paid.
Correct.
That's what you wanted to say.
That's cut and dry. That's how the world works. You pay your money,
The
I think that's fair.
preliminary that you showed us earlier that didn't have any data around it as far as lot sizes and things like that. Is that typical of what comes in, and are they expecting feedback for that?
That is a little bit atypical. Most of the developers that we work with do provide an initial chart that has the density in it already, that has an average lot size, that will have the lot dimensions already on there and the actual lot size, or a table with all of the lots and the lot size in some form. Obviously, we're going to request that as well from them.
So right now, how many days do you have?
By state, we have 60. It's a little bit less for our ordinance. I think ours is based on business days instead of total days, but it's about 2 months.
And your job at that point is to review that survey, look to see what areas that are in conflict with our
So
ordinance.
review the total plan, look at everything that's included in it, any other state permits that are needed, if they have them or not, any of the utilities that are required, whether they have those approvals or not already, and then we give that feedback.
So there would be so this is just saying, look, if you're serious, put your money down and let's play ball. Is there the opportunity for the developer to come in and say, hey, we're thinking about doing something like this, what should we be
We
considering?
do sketch reviews already, so the sketch review is that kind of conceptual yes or no.
And that doesn't fall under this part.
Correct.
Sounds good. Okay. So this is we're ready to play ball, and you're saying, okay, put your money up.
So with sketch plans, and actually the sketch plan is the section before this, right?
Okay.
So the sketch plan, if they're proposing to do 20 housing units or units, dwellings, however, they should do a sketch plan with us. And that's where we can go through and give them that initial feedback on, this is not gonna work at all, or you have a concept that's probably gonna work, you're gonna have to tweak this and this and this. But when they get to making that preliminary application, they should have a pretty sound concept.
And whether they're gonna be able to do it or not, based on some of those things. Okay. Are you looking for a vote today on
I mean,
this?
we're just looking, so this was something, we included both of these 9 and 10 with the budget request this year to change those fees for subdivisions as well. So council's already seen that we said we'd like to change these 2 portions of the ordinance at that time. So basically looking for just a recommendation for us to ask Mr. Root to kind of make these changes and then bring something back for y'all to vote on to city council.
Do they need to go together?
They do not, no. But these are the 2 changes that we requested. And I put them separately because they're, it's 2 changes.
It's a recommendation from planning. Does somebody want to make a motion that we,
I make a motion that we change section 222, alpha 2, to the wording recommended in agenda item number 9.
I'll second that motion.
any further discussion on this request from the planning department? All those in favor of approving that, signify by saying aye. Okay. Item number 10.
So this is the second item we have on here. Right now, there is not in our ordinances, there is not a defined time period for applications to lay dormant long enough to where they would expire. And this is not for an approved plan. This is for somebody that submits something that has sat, that has been unresponsive, that we've emailed, that we've called, that we've tried to get in touch with, that is no longer making contact back with us. And this has been kind of applied arbitrarily in the past, honestly. We can look back at each of the time periods where through citizen serve and see when things are voided after a couple months, a year, and we've basically got a couple things that have been sitting since 2021 now, when I got here, that are unresponsive still, that I've kind of just got open, that probably are not gonna be responsive at this point and we should close, that are not approved subdivisions.
So right now, there's no cap or no ceiling or no
And
timeline.
it's been applied arbitrarily.
And when you say that this is, so when a developer comes in and he's talking about it and he's working through the process, it may take the developer a year or more to go through all the hoops and hurdles that he might have to go through. What you're saying is, as long as he's in contact, this
So
doesn't,
we wouldn't wanna hold anybody back or cancel anybody who is actively making progress. So if you're having a hard time with your DOT encroachment permit and the state is tough to deal with on this one because of whatever the conditions are, and it does take you a year, we don't wanna hold that against anybody. But if it has been 6 months and we email them and they're like, hey, are you still working on your state encroachment permit? Are you working on your stormwater permit? Are you working on any of these things? And we're still not hearing back from them, that at that point, if they're not saying, yeah, we're still working on it, please.
I'll make a motion that we table agenda item number 10 until the staff comes back with specific wording where it needs to go in section 32-222, because I don't know where we put it and what exactly it should say. I think you guys need to come up with a proposal.
Okay.
I'll second that motion. Some further discussion on that. Mr. Markovich had talked about vested rights rules. I want to see how those potentially apply as far as at what stage of the game are they now in the game. And then I'd like some sort of wording, if possible, that says after we as a county reach out to them and they don't respond, as opposed to just the developers not updating. And that way we can say we've reached out to you, we've tried to reach out to you in this way, we never heard anything back, so now you get to start over. But I would hate for somebody to start over, or us tell somebody to start over, who's actively working, who's just, everything's on a shelf at the moment
we
until
don't need it.
DOT gets
We don't need it.
involved. So, all those in favor then of your motion for planning to,
Did you second it?
I did.
Sorry.
I did second it, and so all those in favor of planning coming back with specific wording and where it should go.
I do have
So-
one question on this. Just a curiosity question. So a lot of these proposed subdivisions are under ag exemption. The property is.
The tax,
Yeah, tax exemption. So when does it change from the ag tax exemption to the 6% being charged on that property?
So that's a tax question that I'm not able to answer for you, but I would assume when the new plat is recorded.
Okay. So it's not when they open the project, it's actually when
It
the,
is not. Well, I mean, I don't know the answer to you.
can you find that answer for us? Because it's, I've just been curious about that. But anyway,
So I think it would either be at the time that the plat is recorded or when the property transfers. So if they purchase the property, I would assume they'd have to reapply for the tax exemption, but I don't know, but I'll find out.
All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Okay. Perfect.
Maybe table is not the right word, postpone.
yeah.
So
You want to amend it?
we don't want to table it.
Okay. Are we, so
Postpone was the.
we're postponing, can you put that into the minutes? Does anybody have objection to that?
You want to revote or?
Let's, just for formality, let's revote that it should be postponed and not tabled until you're able to come back with those details. All those in favor of that, signify by saying aye.
Yes.
Thank you. I think that covers our agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All right.